Hope you're having a good day. Today we are ranking philosophical ideas and positions based on very objective measures like how based they are. Let's begin. Nihilism. Well, if nihilism is correct, then there is no point in even making this video. Nor is nihilism very based. I mean, what's based about saying nothing means everything, bro? Bro, it's all meaningless, bro. Big rocks in space. So definitely not a very good idea, even though it might be a very logical one. That's where it works very well. Many people think that it's a very logical and rational position to take. That truly there is no. If we are always to ask why, it will lead us down the infinite regression problem, and it seems to be that maybe there is no end. Maybe it actually is a rational position. So definitely there is some, in a sense, value in thinking about that kind of idea, and it has some good rational basis for belief in it. Yet it's not very convincing, at least in the sense that, well, if it's correct, then it doesn't even matter if I don't believe in it. So we're gonna put that in the C tier. Continuing with similar ideas, hedonism. Hedonism is the idea that pleasure is the most important thing, and we should just have as much pleasure as we can. So eat as much good food, chase all the materialistic pleasures of life, and there is truly no greater goal, and suffering should be avoided. Once again, it has some basis in it. Of course, pleasure is important, and if there is no pleasure, then in a sense, why exist? But personally, I don't see it as a very good idea, because I see a lot of enjoyment even, and a lot of good coming from things that don't give you pleasure, at least not instantly, like exercise and doing work. Like, these are all things that will make you happier in the long term and make you have more pleasure in the long term. But in the short term, they could be quite the opposite of pleasure. Of course, it depends on how you define pleasure, whether these fall into the category of being good in hedonism or not being something that you should aim for. I think hedonism lacks a greater purpose, like it does. There is no greater purpose except just pleasure. And so it goes kind of in the same category as nihilism in many ways. They share a lot of things, saying that there is no more greater purpose than just what we can experience as pleasure on earth. But I think hedonism is less rational, in a sense that in nihilism they admit that they can never even get to the point where they can argue that something is better than something else. There is no good or bad necessarily in nihilism, but in hedonism it kind of assumes that pleasure is always good, which I think might be impossible to even justify philosophically without a greater meaning or a higher purpose, which of course hedonism does not advocate for. Hedonism says that there is no greater purpose except the pleasures of life. So I'm gonna have to put hedonism in the D tier. Next up, existentialism. That's a big word and I cannot spell it. But yeah, it basically means that purpose is what we should create. Everyone creates their own purpose, and in a sense we have a freedom to create a purpose in this life. It also, in a sense, claims that there is no one greater purpose that we all have, that we should strive for, but people can create their own goals and their own purposes and meaning in life. I think it's almost very similar to, once again, nihilism and hedonism, in the sense that there is no one specific goal, like getting to heaven or living the longest possible life. Like your goal could be in existentialism that I want to be the best bodybuilder, or I want to become a professional footballer, and that could be your meaning in life. Or your meaning could be I want to just go in nature and walk around. But I think this is like better than hedonism, because you can, in a sense, accept that your goals, this meaning, this greater meaning that you can choose for yourself, can also induce suffering, in a sense, and pain. So, for example, like we talked about, becoming a professional athlete, that's gonna require a lot of work in the gym and exercising, which is not always gonna be fun, and you're not gonna always enjoy it, but it still can be, in a sense, fulfilling. And I think that's what definitely existentialism gets correct in a lot of ways, is that there can be at least some level of meaning in even these ideas that don't necessarily in the moment cause us any kind of pleasure or enjoyment. So I'm gonna have to put that at the long pause B tier. The last of these kinds is Stoicism. Basically the idea that when we cannot control things, we should not care. Oh, lightning just struck me. Don't care, I don't control it. It's basically the art of not giving a fuck. And so it's in a sense kind of based, but at the same time I think it lacks in the capability of being in any sense realistic. It's kind of like in nihilism it's not very realistic, because no matter how nihilistic you think you are, you're always gonna do things that feel meaningful to you. And in the same way, Stoicism, it's like, you can always say that, okay, we shouldn't let things that are out of our control affect us. Be stoic, like a rock, and not be fazed by things that we cannot control. But like, if you get a call that all your loved ones died in a car accident, I don't think very many people are gonna be, oh, I didn't control that, so I'm just gonna continue my day as normal. Like, I don't think that's how most people will react, no matter how stoic they claim to be. So it definitely lacks in a sense, realism and being applicable to your life. But there is certainly some value in that being like an ideal to strive for. And certainly it's a very based ideology, so we're gonna put that in the 8 here. Next up, materialism. Yes, the view that the whole world is just material. There is no spirits, there is no soul, there is no God, there is nothing. Everything is material. Atoms and electrons. Alright. Once again, it's in a sense a rational idea. I think a lot of people can very easily get to the conclusion that the world could be very materialistic. I mean, there's not, in a sense, spirits that we see every day. There's not a lot of evidence that some supernatural forces exist. All of these holistic healers be like, oh yeah, let me read the fucking tarot cards. Like, fuck off, man. You don't know anything. Like, so in a sense, materialism is once again a very rational position to take. But I think it's kind of once again lacks in the based department. Because what's based about saying everything is just rocks floating in space? Not very based. It also kind of goes hand in hand with nihilism, in the sense that, well, everything's material, there is no greater purpose, and so on. Now, of course, it's not the same as nihilism. They can definitely be materialists who believe in other things except nihilism, but they also go hand in hand very, very, very well. It requires quite a lot for people to not be materialists. If we look at many fields like science, like for example, science in a sense assumes materialism in the sense that, hey, if we cannot observe it and look at it, and if there's no empirical data of something, we're just gonna assume that it doesn't exist. And that's basically all this spirit energy and stuff like that is outside of materialism. So you know what, I'm gonna put materialism in the B tier with existentialism. Now the opposite of materialism, which is idealism. So basically there is nothing material. Everything is in our head. Now that's a based ideology. Definitely getting plus points for being based. I mean, imagine being very clever and being like, yep, everything just exists in our mind. I mean, definitely an idea that is, I would say, hard to convince people of, because we can touch and feel things. There's a table here, and so most people would assume and intuitively feel like, hey, there's material things and not everything is just some weird world that we imagine or hallucinate. And I just imagine this table so much that my hand stops even though there's actually nothing. You know, actually my hand isn't even real because I'm just imagining my hand. Like, yeah, it's a bit ridiculous, but it's also very based. So, and based is very valuable in my rankings, so we'll definitely put it in the A tier. Now, what about dualism? There is immaterial, there is material. Now, that seems to be quite a popular view, in a sense that most people say that, okay, the world is completely materialistic, but immaterial things like logic can exist, in a sense. Logic is not a material thing, it's a system that we've created and it's immaterial, but it is a real thing, an entity. And also dualism can include ideas like a God exists. Now, of course, there is people who say that spirits and ghosts exist, but I personally have seen no evidence of such things. But I think the idea in general is that immaterial things are real in the same sense that material things are, and the world consists of both of those. And I think this is probably the most rational position to take, even if you are in a sense a materialist and you believe that all of our thoughts are just in a sense reactions in a brain. Even then you could in a sense argue for dualism in the sense for like things like we talked about, logic, mathematics, ideas, like these things can be real in a sense without being material. For example, relationships. You know, I can see that there is a certain type of relationship between these two people, even though that relationship, the names that people have, these are not material. It's not like we have a tattoo on our forehead with our name. Yet they exist and we act as if they are real things and entities. Now, of course, are they? I don't know. But I think dualism is one of the most logical positions that you can take. I mean, it's not very based because it's so common, but it's so good and so, I think, convincing of a position that I'm gonna put it in the S tier, the first one. Now, we're getting on to epistemology. We've been through like, kind of like ethics, you know, what is the meaning? And then we've been through ontology, what is the world made out of? But now we're getting into epistemology, what is our information based upon? So let's look at empirism. Empirism is that our information is basically sense data, and sense data is the most, in a sense, important data and knowledge that we can have. Empirism, in a sense, is, I think, a very rational position. I mean, if we think about all the things that we observe with our eyes and what we hear with our ears and smell and so on, what we touch, all of these are like empirical data, and in our day-to-day life, that's basically all the data that we use. Most people don't think about, okay, how do I put the fork in my mouth to eat food? What's the mathematical equation of the vector that my hand has to move in to put food in my mouth? Like, no, like we just go, oh, this touch, feel, boom, boom. And so empirism, I think, is a very, in a sense, rational position, but I think the only criticism and the common criticism of it is especially that how can we trust our experiences? Because if we put two people in basically the same situation, they're gonna experience it differently. They're gonna give different accounts for what happened and what was the story. They pay attention to different things. If we show two people the same painting, most people will look at them and be like, oh, that's clearly a nice boat, and somebody will look at the background and oh, there's a nice island there. And there's literally optical illusions that are made to be in the sense that you can see two different things, and different people tend to see different things in those. Of course, you can see both as well, but most people tend to see, at least at first, only one. And so there is definitely some limitations to our empirical data that we can collect. But in a sense, it's true that all of our data is empirically gathered. I mean, all scientific tests are empirically based. I mean, if we cannot trust our eyes, how can we trust that we can see the test tube? If we cannot trust our eyes, then how can we observe gravity? How can we observe things falling and being pulled together? How can we see that when two things collide, the Newton's laws of gravity work, and we see that, oh, there's an equal and opposite reaction to this as well. I mean, we do always need some empirical data. And because of that, I'm gonna put this in the A tier. Now, once again, the opposite, rationalism. I mean, rationalism is like the opposite in the sense that, okay, empirical data is not important. We can just rationalize things. Logic and that. Yes, logic, mathematics, very important. But it's like, how much can we trust logic and mathematics and such? Like, what is our capability for logic? That's the first criticism that we can go at. If we can assume that, okay, well, we can logically explain things, sure, but how good is our actual ability to do logical decisions? That's one big problem. Another big problem that I see is that most of our logic is based upon empirical data. I see that this table is identical with itself, so I make the law of identity. Everything is identical to itself, and I base logic off of that, even though there's no logical proof for the law of identity. It's an assumption based on empirical experiences and observations. And so, in many ways, even our logic relies to at least some degree on empirical data. And so I don't really believe that this idea that only rationality is possible. And especially if we were to completely eliminate all empirical data ideas, then it's like, well, can I truly logically even eat food? Like, how do I eat food with logic? Like, if I do not have the empirical experience of being hungry, how do I logically know that I need to eat? Like, if I've never experienced hunger, if I've never had the empirical data of seeing even what food is, like, surely we need at least some degree of empirical data. Now, of course, rationalism doesn't mean that, okay, we are totally blind and deaf and all that, but just my thoughts. I'm gonna put it in the C tier. Now, that which you might have been waiting for, or you might have forgotten already. Theism. What about theism? Is theism rational? I believe so. I think there's a lot of reasons why theism is a very rational position. I think, first of all, I think it gives you meaning in life that most people just want to have. And it's like, well, even if you're wrong, then it's still probably better to believe that there is some greater meaning, even if there is none. And so I think theism is a rational position. Now, which God exists? That's a pretty hard question that I cannot answer. But I certainly do think that theism is a very logical position even in a world that would be atheistic. And so I'm gonna put theism in definitely S tier. Now, what about atheism? I mean, once again, I think atheism can be a very rational position. I don't see it as like, oh wow, how stupid you must be to be an atheist. I mean, I think it's very clear that there are, in a sense, logical reasons to be an atheist. For example, just the idea that, well, I have not seen God, so why believe in such a thing? In a sense, I do understand why people have this, like, well, I would need like some concrete experience of a God to believe in one. But of course, that doesn't really mean that, oh, the sky daddy fallacy. Oh, I'm looking at the sky and I don't see an old man with a beard, therefore no God. Like, of course not. But I think there certainly are problems in atheism. For example, the idea that we probably cannot have a morality in atheism. We probably can't even justify believing in an atheistic worldview in atheism. Because if there is no morality, no good or bad, then why should I even believe in the truth of atheism if atheism is assumed to be true in this example? And so, atheism definitely lacks in giving us meaning and even giving us values, giving us things to strive for, giving us reasons to continue living on. And so that's why I cannot put atheism as high as theism. I'm gonna put atheism in the good middle B tier. Now what about Mr. Polytheism coming in last? Polytheism is like theism, but you believe that there's multiple gods. I mean, that's pretty based. We're gonna put that in the S tier. Long video. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.